Welcome to the Pro Ticker Deep Dive. Today we are looking at a date that, I think it's going to be circled in red in media history textbooks for the next 50 years or so.
Absolutely.
It is February 27, 2026.
Yeah. It really is a date that marks a definitive end of an era. The independent era, if you want to call it that.
Right.
For one of the absolute most storied institutions in Hollywood, we are talking about a consolidation event so massive that it fundamentally reshapes the gravity of the entire entertainment industry.
We are talking, of course, about Paramount-Skydance officially entering a definitive merger agreement to acquire Warner Bros. Discovery, or WBD.
Yes.
And just so we're completely clear on the scale here, because saying big doesn't really cut it, what are the actual numbers we are looking at?
We are looking at an enterprise value of over $110 billion.
Wow.
Yeah, that is the headline number.
Right.
But the story underneath that number is much, much more complex.
Mm.
Because this isn't just a simple purchase. It is a great Hollywood reset.
A great Hollywood reset. I like that.
We are watching two of the historic Big Five studios, Paramount Pictures and Warner Bros., being brought under a single roof.
$110 billion. I just want to pause on that for a second. Because in the world of M&A, we get kind of numb to billions.
We do. We throw the word around constantly.
But this deal, it feels frantic. It feels almost like there was a gun to everyone's head. I mean, if you were following the rumor mill just a week ago, Paramount wasn't even the main character in this story.
No, they weren't. They were the plot twist. And I think that is exactly what makes this specific deep dive so critical for you listening today.
Exactly. Our mission today is to unpack the absolute whiplash of this entire saga.
Because we really need to understand how WBD went from basically signing the closing papers with Netflix to suddenly, out of nowhere, becoming a part of the Paramount empire in a matter of days.
Right. We need to figure out if this is a brilliant strategic masterstroke or just a pure desperation play.
Or maybe a bit of both.
Probably a bit of both.
Yeah.
We're going to get into the battle for IP supremacy. I'm talking Harry Potter moving in with Ethan Hunt.
A crazy thought.
And we have to talk about the money. Because the debt load on this deal makes my stomach hurt just looking at the balance sheet.
It is terrifying.
And of course, the regulators. Because there is just no way the government watches a $100 billion merger happen without asking some really tough questions.
It is arguably going to be the most scrutinized deal of the decade, hands down.
So let's start with the drama. Let's rewind the clock to late 2025. WBD Warner Bros. Discovery was not in a good place.
Not in a good place is putting it very diplomatically.
Yeah.
WBD was under immense pressure. I mean, they were carrying this massive debt load from the previous merger between Warner Media and Discovery back in 2022.
Which everyone said was too much debt at the time.
Exactly. And the stock had just languished. Shareholders were incredibly restless. The board was exploring strategic alternatives, which, in Wall Street terms, usually means get us out of here, find a buyer.
They were actively shopping the company. And by December 4, 2025, they actually had a buyer. It was Netflix.
Correct. There was a legitimate merger agreement in place. Netflix, the undisputed king of streaming, was completely poised to acquire the historic Warner Bros. Studio.
Which makes a lot of sense on paper, right? I mean, Netflix needs content. Warner has arguably the best content library in the world.
It made perfect sense for Netflix's content engine. The offer they put on the table was approximately $27.75 per share.
Okay.
But here is the specific nuance that really matters for you trying to understand this. Netflix was really only interested in the crown jewels.
Right. They wanted the studio and they wanted the streaming service. They absolutely did not want the cable channels.
Exactly. Netflix has always been a forward-looking technology company at its core. So they looked at assets like CNN, TNT, HGTV, Discovery, and they just saw declining businesses.
Legacy baggage.
Total legacy baggage. Their plan was very likely to acquire the entire company, strip out the Warner Bros. Film and TV studio, grab the HBO library, and then spin off the linear networks to someone else entirely.
They wanted the steak, not the cow.
That is a very apt analogy. Netflix is disciplined. They don't want the operational headache of trying to manage a dying cable bundle. They wanted the IP to fuel their global subscriber base. That's it.
So that deal is sitting there. It's December. Everyone in the industry thinks it's happening. It's a done deal. And then chaos. Paramount-Skydance basically kicks down the door.
Enter David Ellison and Paramount-Skydance. They realized very quickly that if Netflix acquired Warner Bros., the game was essentially over.
Game over for everyone else.
Yes, Netflix would become completely untouchable. So Paramount launched a massive counteroffensive. They submitted what the WBD board eventually determined to be a superior proposal.
And when we say superior in this context, we are talking about cold, hard cash.
Paramount offered $31 per share in all cash or all outstanding shares.
Okay, let's break that down for a second. $31 versus Netflix's $27.75. That is a pretty significant premium.
It is roughly an 11 to 12% premium over the Netflix offer, depending on how you actually value the spin-off components of what Netflix was proposing.
Right.
But the key differentiator here wasn't just the share price. It was the structure of the deal itself. Paramount came in and said, we will take everything.
They bought the whole cow.
They bought the cow, the barn, the tractor, and the land it sits on. They didn't try to split the company up. They offered a very clean exit for WBD shareholders, $31 a share, cash out, and walk away.
And that values the equity alone at around $81 billion. But you mentioned earlier the total enterprise value is over $110 billion. Where does that extra $30 billion actually come from?
That is the debt assumption. When you buy a company, you don't just buy their shares. You inherit all their liabilities. And WBD was sitting on a massive mountain of debt, roughly $30 billion or so, that Paramount now has to take onto its own balance sheet.
So that's the difference.
Exactly. That is why the enterprise value, the true cost to actually own and operate the business, is so much higher than just the check they wrote to the shareholders.
So Netflix had a chance to match this, right? I mean, typically they'd have a right of first refusal.
They absolutely did. And this right here is where the philosophy of the two companies really diverges in a fascinating way. Netflix looked at the $31 price tag. They looked at the massive debt load. They looked at the absolute integration nightmare of trying to merge two massive traditional studios.
And they just said, no, thank you.
They walked. It is a classic textbook example of capital discipline. Netflix decided that the return on investment simply wasn't there at that price point, so they bowed out.
But isn't that a massive risk for them? I mean, by walking away, they just allowed one of their biggest competitors to essentially double in size overnight. Aren't they creating a monster that's going to come back to bite them?
It is a calculated risk. But Netflix is betting that the monster, as you call it, is going to be so totally bogged down by debt and integration struggles that it simply won't be nimble enough to hurt them.
They think the monster is going to trip over its own feet.
Precisely. You have to remember, Netflix is a tech company at heart. They value agility above almost everything else. This merger is going to be messy, it's going to be slow, it's going to be painful for Paramount. Netflix chose to stay lean and avoid the mess.
And the market actually seems to agree with them, right? Because Netflix stock didn't crash when they lost the deal.
No, it didn't. It stayed relatively flat. It even ticked up a little bit. Investors were largely relieved. They did not want Netflix getting distracted by trying to run CNN or trying to fix a clearly declining cable business.
Meanwhile, Paramount stock actually rose, which is pretty interesting. Usually the acquirer's stock drops a bit because they're the ones spending all the money.
Right. But in this specific case, the market sees the potential for a real monopoly-style dominance in content. They see the upside.
Before we move completely off the mechanics of the deal, I really have to ask you about this ticking fee thing. I was going through the term sheet, and this stuck out to me as so strange. It basically sounds like a penalty box.
It effectively is a penalty box.
Yeah.
In any M&A deal, time is the ultimate enemy. The longer a deal just hangs in limbo waiting for approval, the more underlying value is destroyed.
But people panic.
Exactly. Employees leave. Strategic initiatives stall out. Competitors start poaching your best clients. So WBD aggressively negotiated a ticking fee into the agreement.
So how does it actually work in practice?
If the transaction does not officially close by September 30, 2026, the price automatically goes up. Paramount has to pay WBD shareholders an additional 25 cents per share for every single quarter the deal's delayed past that date.
Oh, wow. So the meter is literally running.
The meter is running very, very fast.
Yeah.
This puts immense pressure on Paramount to get regulatory approval as quickly as possible. They simply cannot afford to let this drag on into 2027.
And I guess it protects the WBD investors, too.
Absolutely. It protects the WBD shareholders by saying, look, if you tie up our capital for a year while you fight it out with the Department of Justice, you need to pay us interest on that money.
It's basically a very, very expensive late fee.
Exactly.
Okay, so the deal is signed. The massive check is written, or at least promised. Now, I really want to look at what they actually bought. Because when you start listing out the combined assets, it is frankly terrifying. I know they are calling it a super major in the press.
It is honestly the only term that really fits the scale of this. We are officially moving from a Big Five studio system to a Big Four. But this newly combined entity is effectively in a complete league of its own. We are looking at a combined library of over 15,000 film titles
15,000 films.
and thousands of hours of television. But it isn't just about the sheer volume. It is the absolute cultural weight of the franchises they now own.
This is the fun part. Let's look at the actual mashups here.
Well, just look at the fantasy and sci-fi vertical alone. Warner Bros. Brings Harry Potter, they bring Lord of the Rings, they bring Dune,
3 of the absolute biggest pillars in the entire genre.
and Paramount brings Star Trek and Transformers.
So under one single CEO, you now control Hogwarts, Middle-earth, Arrakis, Cybertron, and the Starship Enterprise. That is just an unprecedented concentration of geek culture dominance.
It is basically Comic-Con sitting in a single corporate boardroom.
Right. Then you look at the action side of things. WBD has the entire DC universe, Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, plus they have The Matrix.
And Paramount counters that with Mission Impossible and Top Gun.
So you have the biggest superheroes in the world, and you have the biggest practical action star in the world in Tom Cruise, all sitting on the exact same payroll.
And do not underestimate the animation side of the house either. WBD has the Looney Tunes and Scooby-Doo, which is classic multi-generational IP. Paramount owns Nickelodeon, that means SpongeBob SquarePants, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Avatar, The Last Airbender.
My kids would absolutely lose their minds. I mean, SpongeBob and Scooby-Doo are basically the foundational texts of modern childhood at this point.
And that is exactly the point of buying them. When you own the childhood favorites, you own the churn.
What do you mean by that?
Parents will simply not cancel a subscription if it means losing SpongeBob and Batman at the same time. It creates an incredibly sticky ecosystem for families. You try canceling that app and see what happens in your living room.
It's true. You'd have a full-scale riot. And we haven't even touched on the prestige stuff yet. We have HBO, The Sopranos, The Wire, Succession, Game of Thrones.
Combined directly with Paramount's Yellowstone universe, which, let's remember, is currently the biggest show on conventional cable television.
So you are basically marrying the coastal elite favorite HBO with the massive heartland favorite Yellowstone.
You have covered literally every single demographic in America.
But the thing that really stood out to me when I was digging into the research for this deep dive, it wasn't even the movies or the TV shows. It was the sports. This feels like the actual sleeper hit of the entire deal.
It is absolutely crucial. Live sports is really the only thing keeping the traditional cable bundle alive right now. And this merger creates an absolute sports juggernaut.
What does that combined portfolio actually look like now?
Well, Paramount has long-term rights to the NFL, specifically the AFC package. And they have the PGA Tour. WBD, through its TNT Sports division, brings the NBA, assuming they keep those rights secured. They bring Major League Baseball, the NHL, the U.S. rights to the UFC.
That's a lot.
Oh, and WBD also owns the rights to the Olympics across Europe.
Okay, let's just play this scenario out, because this is wild. I'm a cable provider, I'm Comcast, or I'm Charter. And this new super major entity walks into my office to negotiate their carriage fees for the year. And they sit down and say, look, we have the Super Bowl, we have the NBA Finals, we have March Madness, we have the Stanley Cup, and we have the Masters.
You have absolutely zero leverage as the cable provider. Zero. You simply cannot drop their channels, because if you drop them, your customers are going to cancel their entire cable subscription immediately.
They'll just switch to a provider who has the games.
Exactly. This gives the new company tremendous, almost unparalleled pricing power. They can demand much higher fees from the cable companies, which then translates directly into more revenue to pay down that massive debt load we were talking about earlier.
So it's essentially a defensive moat.
It is the ultimate defensive moat in media today. Netflix does not have live sports at this kind of scale. Disney has ESPN, sure. But this newly combined portfolio easily rivals and frankly might even exceed ESPN in terms of sheer breadth and year-round coverage.
And speaking of that cable bundle, Netflix didn't want it. They looked at CNN and MTV and just said a hard pass. But Paramount clearly seems to think there's life in the old dog yet.
They do.
Yeah.
And this merger actually reunites a really massive family of legacy cable brands. On one side, you have the Discovery lifestyle channels, HGTV, Food Network, TLC.
Reality TV powerhouses.
Right. Then you have the Viacom channels coming from Paramount, MTV, Nickelodeon, Comedy Central, BET, VH1. And then you add in the Turner networks from WBD, TNT, TBS, CNN.
And CBS News.
Yes. Combining CNN with CBS News creates a global news-gathering operation that is just staggeringly large.
It's massive.
But there is a really fun nostalgic element here, too, for media nerds. MTV and the movie channel were actually originally owned by a joint venture that involved Warner way back in the day.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. So this deal effectively reunites MTV with its original Warner cousins after 40 years of being separated.
It is a very, very expensive family reunion. But okay, let's pivot to the future for a minute because all those cable channels we just listed, yes, they are cash cows today, but they are dying cows.
Inevitably, yeah.
The future is obviously streaming. Right now we have Max, formerly HBO Max, and we have Paramount Plus. Are we going to see a Paramount Max Plus? What is the actual consumer product going to be here?
That is the $100 billion question right there. The stated goal from management is to create a single global streaming competitor with enhanced reach, engagement, and monetization. It's the corporate speak. But practically, the combined entity is projected to have somewhere around 207 million streaming subscribers worldwide.
207 million. That instantly puts them in the big three. It is basically going to be Netflix, Disney, and whatever we end up calling this new thing.
Correct. But the actual execution of putting those together is going to be incredibly difficult. They are talking right now about migrating to a single enterprise resource planning system and consolidating their entire technology stacks.
Okay, stop right there. Consolidating technology stacks. That sounds super boring to the average person,
Right.
but anyone who actually works in tech knows that is a waking nightmare.
It is a profound, profound headache. Think about it. You have two entirely different billing systems. You have two different user databases, two totally different recommendation algorithms, two different app architectures built on different code bases.
It's a mess.
Merging all of those into a single, seamless experience without alienating your current customers or just losing massive amounts of data is a monumental task. Yeah. We already saw how bumpy the transition was just going from HBO Max to Max.
People were furious they had to re-download an app.
Exactly. Now imagine trying to do that while simultaneously integrating the entire Paramount Plus ecosystem.
So do they just mash it all into one giant super app? Or do they just bundle it together like Disney does with Hulu and Disney Plus?
The industry chatter right now suggests a super app is the ultimate long-term goal, but a bundled offering is very likely going to be the interim step just to get something to market quickly. However, Paramount CEO David Ellison have been very, very specific about one thing. He wants to fiercely preserve the HBO brand identity.
Well, he knows what he just bought. HBO is the Rolls-Royce of television. You do not slap a bumper sticker on a Rolls-Royce.
Exactly. He might treat HBO as a premier store within a store on the new app, or maybe as a very distinct sub-brand that retains its own unique premium feel. But the broader strategy here is really what matters. Why go through all this pain? Why take on all this incredible debt just to build a slightly bigger app?
It is the big tech boogeyman, isn't it?
It is entirely a defensive move against big tech. You really have to understand the landscape these legacy studios are operating in. Amazon, Apple, and Google are massive competitors in the entertainment space now. But for them, entertainment is basically just a hobby.
Right. Amazon makes the Rings of Power not because they absolutely need that specific show to turn a profit. They make it because they want you to keep your Prime subscription active so you keep buying toothpaste and batteries from them.
Exactly. Content is just a loss leader for big tech. It's a marketing expense line item. Apple makes Ted Lasso primarily to sell more iPhones and Apple service bundles. They can easily afford to lose billions of dollars on making content because they're making literally trillions of dollars elsewhere in their hardware business.
But for Paramount and Warner Bros.
For them, content is the business. Period. They have absolutely no other revenue stream to fall back on. They don't sell phones, they don't sell two-day shipping, they sell movies, and they sell TV shows.
But have to make a profit on the actual art.
They do. They cannot afford to lose money indefinitely, like Apple can. So the only possible way to survive against competitors with infinite bank accounts is to get massive. You need to be so incredibly big that you become essential to the consumer. You need to be the super major.
So the internal logic is basically, if we don't merge right now, Amazon or Apple will eventually just buy us for parts in 5 years anyway.
Or if we don't merge, we will just slowly bleed out from 1,000 tiny cuts until we are completely irrelevant. This is a pure survival play at its core.
Okay, so they are building a massive fortress to survive the tech siege. I get that. But fortresses are expensive to build. And this brings us to the part of the deal that genuinely scares me as someone who looks at markets. The financing. Because they definitely aren't paying for this with cash they found under the mattress.
No, they are not. The financial architecture of this deal is, well, it's aggressive. It is a highly, highly leveraged transaction.
Break it down for us. Where is all this money actually coming from?
It is a mix of new equity and massive amounts of new debt. First, Paramount is issuing $47 billion in new Class B shares. That is priced at roughly $16.02 per share.
And who is actually stepping up to buy that much equity?
The primary backers here are the Ellison family and Redbird Capital Partners.
The Ellisons, as in Larry Ellison, the founder of Oracle.
Yes. David Ellison is the CEO of Skydance and the guy running the show here, but the real financial muscle behind him is his father, Larry Ellison, who is obviously one of the richest men on the entire planet. This is, in many ways, the Ellison family placing a historic, legacy-defining bet on the future of traditional media.
But $47 billion in equity still isn't enough to cover this. They need more.
Much more. They have secured $54 billion in bridge debt financing from a huge consortium of major banks. We are talking Bank of America, Citi, Apollo.
$54 billion just in bridge financing. So that's just short-term debt they're taking on just to get the deal closed, right?
Correct. Which means they will eventually need to refinance all of that into long-term bonds down the road.
Mm-hmm.
But here is the truly scary number for you. When you combine this brand new debt with the massive existing debt they are assuming from WBD, the pro forma net debt load of this newly combined company is expected to hit nearly $79 billion. And some analysts think it could easily go as high as $90 billion once everything settles.
$90 billion. That is the GDP of a small country.
It is a staggering amount of leverage to put on a media company, especially in an industry that is going through a massive disruptive transition.
I mean, I remember clearly when WBD just had their $43 billion in debt from the previous merger, and Wall Street punished them relentlessly for it. Every single earnings call was just analysts asking about debt. And now they are basically doubling down.
They are. They're making a massive bet that the synergies and the combined cash flow will be enough to pay it down before it crushes them.
Ugh. Synergies. The classic corporate euphemism for firing people.
Management is officially promising $6 billion in cost savings. And yes, in reality, that means significant layoffs. It means combining redundant marketing departments, legal teams, HR, IT. It means aggressive real estate optimization, meaning they're going to be selling off a lot of studio lots and office buildings.
Huh.
But there is a strategic twist here regarding how they actually plan to execute this debt repayment that I find really fascinating.
What's the twist?
It brings us right back to those dying cable channels we talked about. Remember how we said Netflix completely rejected them?
Yeah, Netflix wouldn't touch them with a 10-foot pole.
Paramount wants them specifically because of the debt.
Wait, explain that logic to me. Why in the world do you want a clearly declining asset when you owe the bank $90 billion?
Because declining assets in the media space are often incredible cash cows.
How so?
Cable networks require very little new capital investment to keep running. You do not need to spend billions of dollars to run HGTV or MTV. The unscripted content is relatively cheap to produce. They just run marathons of House Hunters or ridiculousness all day. But they still generate massive, highly predictable monthly checks from the cable companies and carriage fees and from the advertisers.
Oh, so they are literally using the profits of the old world to pay for building the new world.
Precisely. They plan to ruthlessly milk the cash flow from the linear networks, MTV, CNN, TNT, all of it. And they are going to use almost every single penny of that profit to aggressively service the debt. It is essentially a race against time. The whole gamble is, can they use the cable money to pay down the debt before the cable model collapses entirely?
That is a high-stakes gamble. It is like using the parts of your old car to pay for the gas in your new car while you are actively driving down the highway at 100 miles an hour.
That is a very vivid image.
Yeah.
But it's not inaccurate at all. And the Ellisons absolutely know the stakes are astronomically high. That is exactly why they included the Ellison guarantee in the deal structure.
I saw this in the notes. The Lawrence J. Ellison Revocable Trust. It sounds like something straight out of an episode of Succession.
It's the ultimate proof of skin in the game. The trust is providing a personal, ironclad guarantee for two very major fees associated with this merger. First, they're guaranteeing the payment of the $2.8 billion termination fee that is owed to Netflix for breaking the original deal.
Wait a minute, so WBD had to pay Netflix nearly $3 billion just to say, oops, never mind, we found a better offer.
Yes, that is standard practice in these massive agreements. If you break a signed merger deal to go with a better offer, you have to pay a breakup fee. The Ellisons are personally covering that check.
And what is the second guarantee?
This is a real big one.
Yeah.
They're guaranteeing the $7 billion regulatory termination fee.
$7 billion.
Yes. If the regulators, meaning the Department of Justice or the FTC, completely block this deal and it cannot legally close,
Hmm.
Paramount owes WBD $7 billion in cash. And Larry Ellison is personally guaranteeing that check will clear.
That is incredibly confident. That is a $7 billion bet from one family that says, we think we can beat the regulators in court if we have to. But realistically, can they? Because we are talking about moving from 5 major studios down to 4. That feels like exactly the kind of consolidation the DOJ exists to stop.
It is going to be a brutal, drawn-out review process. The antitrust hurdles here are incredibly significant. You have the DOJ and the FTC, both of which have been very, very aggressive regarding corporate consolidation under the current administration.
Right.
You also have the California State Attorney General aggressively investigating the market concentration and the potential labor impacts.
The Hollywood unions must be absolutely furious about this.
The Writers Guild, the Screen Actors Guild, IATE, they are all very, very concerned, and rightly so. Because consolidation in Hollywood almost always means fewer jobs. Fewer movies being greenlit means significantly less work for lighting technicians, for costume designers, for writers. They will be actively lobbying very hard against this approval in Washington.
So what is the legal argument here? How does Paramount walk into the DOJ and say, with a straight face, merging these two absolute giants is actually good for market competition?
Their entire argument relies on completely redefining what the market actually is. If you define the market narrowly as legacy Hollywood studios, then yes, this looks like a monopoly. But Paramount is going to argue that the market is actually global video entertainment.
So they are going to point directly at Netflix and Amazon.
Exactly. They're going to walk in there and say, look, we aren't the big guys anymore. Look at Apple. Look at Amazon. Look at Alphabet. They are trillion-dollar companies. We are just a humble $100 billion traditional media company just trying to survive the tech onslaught.
That's clever.
They will argue that a combined Paramount WBD is actually a much stronger competitor to big tech, which ultimately prevents a total tech monopoly over our cultural output.
Let us merge so we can actually fight the real monsters.
That is the pitch. Whether the DOJ actually buys it or not is an entirely different story. But that massive $7 billion personal guarantee strongly suggests the Ellisons have done their homework and firmly believe they have a viable legal path to approval.
Look, I have to ask this. The Ellisons. Larry Ellison, he is a major political donor. He has deep connections. Is there a political angle playing out here? Does having a very powerful backer help smooth the waters in Washington?
Look, in the world of mega mergers at this scale, you can never entirely discount the soft power of relationships and lobbying. While the DOJ is theoretically an independent body and operates strictly on statutes and case law, the broader perception of the deal really matters. David Ellison is actively positioning this new entity as an all-American company, stepping up to save American cultural heritage from, well, mostly American tech companies. But you get the narrative idea. It is a narrative battle just as much as it is a legal one.
So let's talk about the leadership, because the cast of characters involved here is pretty fascinating. We have David Ellison, who is essentially the new king of Hollywood now. Who is he, really?
David Ellison is a really interesting figure because he perfectly bridges the gap between these two worlds. He is the son of a major tech mogul, so he implicitly understands Silicon Valley and how they operate. But he has also spent the last 15 years actively running Skydance, which is a very legitimate, highly successful production company. He co-financed Top Gun, Maverick. He co-financed the recent Mission Impossible films.
So he's not just a guy with a checkbook. He's an actual creative partner.
Right. He has been in the trenches of making movies. He reads scripts. He understands the nitty-gritty of the production process. This isn't just some private equity guy coming in to strip the copper wiring out of the walls and sell the real estate. His stated vision is to honor the legacy of these studios while simultaneously building a next-generation media company. He genuinely wants to be the guy who finally transitions Hollywood into the 21st century properly.
And then on the other side of the table, there's David Zaslav, the current CEO of WBD. He has been, let's just say, a complicated figure for film fans recently.
That is a very polite way to put it. Zaslav has been a massive lightning rod for controversy over the last couple of years. I mean, he famously shelved finished movies like Batgirl just to take a corporate tax write-off.
Yeah.
He gutted the Turner Classic Movies leadership before massive public backlash made him backtrack. He aggressively removed beloved content from HBO Max to save on residual payments. The creatives in town largely hated him.
But the WBD shareholders might have a very different view of him today.
Precisely. Zaslav's core argument, and you'll hear him say this, is that he did the dirty work nobody else wanted to do. He came in, he cut the fat, he ruthlessly streamlined the operations, and he paid down just enough of that debt to make the company sellable. He views this deal selling the company at $31 a share when the stock was struggling as his ultimate vindication. He did exactly what he was hired to do. He maximized value for the shareholders.
You cleaned up the house, kicked out the bad tenants, painted all the walls beige, and sold it for a huge profit.
And now he gets to parachute out with what will undoubtedly be a massive, massive exit package.
So we have a pretty clear picture now of the landscape. A $110 billion behemoth, a debt load that could literally crush a small country, a content library that includes basically everything I've ever watched in my entire life, and a target closing date of Q3 2026.
Assuming, of course, that the shareholders officially vote yes in the spring, and assuming the regulators don't drop the hammer on the whole thing.
So for the listener right now, the person who isn't trading stocks, the person who just wants to sit down and watch House of the Dragon or the new season of Yellowstone, what does all of this corporate maneuvering actually mean for you?
In the short term, expect your monthly streaming bill to go up.
It always does.
The era of cheap, subsidized streaming is officially over. This merger is fundamentally about acquiring pricing power. You will very likely see a hard push towards a bundled product that definitely costs more each month, but offers everything in one place. If you are a massive sports fan, you might actually love it. You get one app for the NFL, the NBA, and the NHL. But if you just want to watch movies, you might start feeling like you're paying a premium for a lot of sports and reality TV stuff you never watch.
It's literally the return of cable TV 2.0, just delivered over the internet this time.
It is the great rebundling. We're right back where we started. But I think there is a deeper, more structural risk for the consumer here, and that is the homogenization of content.
Explain that for us.
When you have fewer buyers in the market, you inevitably have fewer voices on screen. Think about it. If there are 5 major studios, you have 5 distinct chances to sell your weird, risky, totally original script. If there are only 4, your odds go down by 20%. A combined Paramount-Warner entity, especially one carrying $90 billion in debt, might just decide they only want guaranteed, safe franchises. They might say, if it's not a sequel, a prequel, or a reboot of something we already own, we simply aren't making it.
So we get Harry Potter 9 and Mission Impossible 12, but we never get the next original hit like Barbie or the next Inception.
That is the big fear in the creative community right now. Massive consolidation almost always leads to creative safety. The company becomes too big to fail, which in Hollywood really just means too big to take risks.
That is honestly a pretty depressing thought for the future of movies. But I want to close this deep dive with an even bigger question. Because we've spent this hour analyzing the mechanics and the money, but when you step back and look at the whole picture, is this even sustainable?
How do you mean?
Well, we are actively watching a legacy media company take on historic levels of debt, $80 or $90 billion, specifically to build a giant fortress against the tech giants. But can a fortress actually survive if it is too heavy to move?
You were asking if they are basically building a dinosaur.
Exactly. Are they building the ultimate apex predator, the T-Rex of media? Or are they building a creature that is so impossibly heavy, so weighed down by all this debt and these old dying cable networks that it simply can't outrun the asteroid? Because the tech giants, Apple, Amazon, they are agile. They have infinite cash. They can pivot whenever they want. Paramount is now completely locked into this one massive heavy path.
That is the defining business question of the next decade in entertainment. Scale absolutely provides protection in the short term, but it inherently creates massive inertia. David Ellison is betting the farm that the IP, the timeless stories, the characters people love, is valuable enough to completely overcome the sheer weight of the debt. He firmly believes that Star Trek and Batman are eternal assets that will always generate massive revenue, no matter how the underlying distribution technology changes.
But if global interest rates go up again, or if cord cutting accelerates even 5% faster than their internal models predict,
Then that massive mountain of debt very quickly becomes a fatal landslide.
well, on that cheerful note of landslides and dinosaurs, we are going to wrap it up for today. This has been the Pro Ticker Deep Dive into the massive Paramount-Warner deal. We will definitely be watching the regulatory fight in Washington closely over the next year because, trust me, the drama is only just getting started.
It is going to be a truly fascinating year to watch this play out.
Thanks for listening. We will see you on the next Deep Dive.